Well, welcome everybody to Compass Christian Church. Our mission and your mission is navigating people to God, and we are one church in thousands of locations. Wherever it is that you are watching from this morning, let me know in the comments. I'm following along and would love to just engage with you guys in the comments today. I've just to prove it, I've got my phone right here. So I'm so glad to be with you guys. I want to say welcome to Hannah Strickland and Janae on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you engage with us on there. We would love to have a good conversation with you in the comments. And also want to say hello to Jonna Durham. What's up, Jonna? Kristen, Kula Booth. Good to see you guys. Kelly Stewart. And I want to give a happy birthday shout out to my friend Joel Kaut. If you guys will throw him a happy birthday emoji, maybe a little birthday cake emoji there in the comments, we want to celebrate with him today. And I'm just so honored that on your birthday, you would join us here on Compass Online. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We're finishing a series today called Wish You Were Here. So let me know where you're watching from. Maybe you're watching from your living room. Maybe you're still in bed. It's after 11, by the way. But that's a nice Sunday morning. Maybe you're watching from the lake. Maybe you are on vacation. Maybe you're up in the mountains, up in Colorado. Guys, it has been really hot here. We've hit the triple digits a few times. So I wish I was in Colorado too. Maybe you're at the beach. I feel like if it's going to be super hot, you might as well be at the beach. So I wish I was at the beach too. Way to go. You are doing it right. Or maybe you just wish you could go on vacation, but with everything that's going on in the world right now, your vacation had to be canceled or it just wasn't possible financially for you this year. And I think we all have these desires, these wishes. We wish we could go. But it's not just a vacation destination that we wish we could get to. A lot of us, if we were being honest, there's like statuses in our lives, targets that we wish we were at. Maybe there's a target weight that you wish you were at, or a target relationship status. Maybe you thought, I'd be married at this point in my life. Maybe there's a target, something else in your life that you really look forward to, an amount of money that you thought you'd be making or have saved up by this point. Now, some of you are just hearing me say the word target, and you're like, I just wish I was at Target. That's my wife, and I know many of you, if you love Target, you just wish you could escape to Target. Throw the Target emoji in the comments for me right now. And I see you guys wishing Joel a happy birthday. Thanks, Bernita, for throwing some birthday cakes in there. Throw that Target emoji in there if that's where you wish you were today. But I think we all have these target destinations where we wish we were. And what we've been exploring in this series over the last few weeks, if you missed any of the messages, just go back and listen to them. You can just scroll down in our Facebook feed or our YouTube channel. You can also go to our website and listen to the early weeks of this series, Wish You Were Here. But I want to close it out today. We've been talking about what does it take to move from here, where I am, to where I wish I was. And not only that, but what will it take for you to move from where you are right now to where God wishes you were? I mean, God sees great potential for your life and who you are and what you can do and accomplish. And you might feel worthless and a waste of time, and I've just totally wasted my life. I'm not where God wants me to be. Listen, there's still so much more. And your life can be so much more, even than it is now. And we want to help you realize that potential. Not only where you are right now, we totally love you and accept you where you are, but we would also love to help you get to where you wish you were. I would love for you to help me get to where I wish I was, and for all of us to help and love one another as we try to get to where God wishes we were and the potential that He has for our lives. Today, I want to specifically talk and lean into the idea, if we build on the wisdom of the last few weeks and what we've talked about. Today, I want to talk about, isn't it interesting? There's somebody that knows how to get from where you are right here or now to where you wish you were. And maybe it's because they've read about it. Maybe it's because they've been through it. Like they've been in your shoes and it was in a different time, in a different place. Maybe it was 30, 40 years ago. But they were in your status of life and they know how to get from where you are right now to where you wish you were. Maybe you even know this person. They might be in your family or they might be one of your friends. And maybe they've given you advice before. I think it's incredible to think about. There are people that know how to get from where we are to where we wish we were. But isn't the problem that we often resist and push back on the advice that they give to us? Even though they know how to get there, for some reason we push back and we resist. And if you're an American watching right now, I know we have people that watch from all over the globe. if you're an American, isn't this just in our DNA? We just want to push back. If you tell me to do something, I just want to do the exact opposite, especially if you're a Texan. You just take it up. It's like in the DNA, in the blood. You tell me something, well, now I have to do the opposite because that's just the way it is. I see a sign that says, don't touch wet paint. Well, now I got to touch the paint. I don't know what it is, right? You ever feel this way? Or do you ever see the sign that says, keep off grass? And they're like, but now I really want to feel that grass on my feet, so I got to walk on the grass. I'll tell you this. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I've had occasions where I was driving and my gas gauge was on empty, and the little empty light, the red light, pops up empty. And I'll have somebody say, hey, Luke, you should probably stop and get gas. I know I probably should, but in that moment I start to think, but what if I can make it? And I have this crazy struggle of like, what if I can make it? Then I would win. What? The make-believe race? I don't know. But I've had multiple times where I have run out of gas because I didn't follow the good advice, and I ended up having to hike to the gas station, pick up a can and fill it up with gas, walk all the way back to the car and fill it up. And I ended up not where I wanted to be, or much later than I wanted to be there, because I didn't listen. Let me know in the comments today if you've ever had good advice that you just didn't follow along with. I love everybody that's joining in with us today. Matthew and Shelby Toller giving that Target run love and the emojis. You guys are awesome. But aren't there things that people tell us how to get from where we are to where we wish we were? And often we push back. Today I want to tell a story that I hope will soften our resistance towards the advice that people give to you, people that love you and care about you and want what's best to help you get from where you are to where you wish you were. It's a story in what we call the Old Testament of the Bible. If you're not familiar with the Bible, there's two major segments, the Old Testament and the New Testament. This one's from the Old Testament. It's a very, very old story. And all you need to know is that God originally, thousands of years ago, he chose a nation of people, and he intended for them to be governed by laws and judges. State of the art, right? Today, every country wants to be run by laws and judges. It's the way to go. But back then, it was state of the art. In fact, so state of the art that they didn't appreciate it. Every other country at that time had a king, it felt like. And so Israel got jealous. They wanted a king, and so they set up a kingdom. Their first king was King Saul. King Saul was followed by King David. And then David, his son, when David passed away, his son became king, King Solomon. And the plan was, when Solomon passed away, that his son, Rehoboam, would become king. And our story today takes place in the transition between King Solomon and King Rehoboam. In that transition, King Rehoboam was going to take over after his dad passed away. And here's what happened right at the beginning. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1. Rehoboam, who is King Solomon's son, went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. Their intention is right there. They intended to make him king. But verse 3 says, the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam, and they said to him, listen, future king Rehoboam, your father put a heavy yoke on us. King Solomon was hard on us. What is a yoke? A yoke is a farm implement that's used to link up oxen and other animals so that they can plow the fields and things like that. We don't really use that much anymore because farmers use tractors and things like that. But you've probably seen a yoke. And these people are using this image to say, it was like your dad forced us into hard labor. And he really ground us down into the dust. Your father put a heavy yoke on us. But now, Rehoboam, lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke that your father put on us, and we will serve you. They say, listen, Rehoboam, we're all about you being king, but you got to be a different kind of king. King Solomon was extremely wealthy and extremely wise, and we know that under his rule, Israel prospered and they thrived. They built all of these incredible palaces, all these incredible cities. Dignitaries from all over the world, the Queen of Sheba in Ethiopia, came to listen to Solomon's wisdom and just to ponder at all the greatness of Israel. And we often see that if you know much about the Old Testament. But what we don't always see is the toll physically it took on the people. We also know or believe that King Solomon had about 150,000 forced laborers, the ones who actually had to cut the stone and transport it and build all these massive public works projects. And the toll upon them was great, and it was heavy. And so they say, listen, we're all about you being king, Rehoboam, but you got to be a different kind of king. You have to lighten the weight. You have to lessen the load upon the people. We can't take it. We've been overtaxed. We've been overworked. The economy is going to teeter if this keeps going forward. It's time for us to rest. It's time for us to recover. Verse 5, Rehoboam answered, well, go away for 3 days and then come back. He says, give me a little time, which is always a good decision when you're making a big decision. Hey, give me a little time to think this over. And then he does another really wise thing. He gets some good advice. Verse 6 says, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father during Solomon's lifetime. He goes to the very guys who had advised his father, King Solomon, for 40 years of ruling a prosperous, united, keyword, kingdom. Hey guys, you have had your thumb on the pulse of this nation for decades. What should I do to make sure that we continue as a prosperous, united kingdom? And he gets some really good advice from them. But I don't think it was what he wanted to hear. Look at what they told to him. Verse 7, they replied, Rehoboam, if today you will be a servant to these people, I think if you know much about ancient history and world history, and even today, most people that have power don't want to serve or humble themselves under others. It's just kind of the nature of power. But the elders say, if you serve these people and give them a favorable answer, then they will always be your servants. If you'll humble yourself right now, Rehoboam, and put yourself under these people, then they will be loyal to you, and you will be the king of a united, prosperous kingdom for your whole life. A kingdom, Rehoboam, that you could then pass on to your son. Just like your grandfather passed it on to your father, and your father is passing it on to you. If that's what you want. In other words, if you want to get from where you are to where you wish you were, the king of a united kingdom, here's what you need to do. Put their interests ahead of your own interests. Which doesn't that apply to you and me today? So hard. It's the age-old story of how much we want to put our needs ahead of other people's needs, or our wants, what I want, ahead of what other people need. And the elders of Israel say, Rehoboam, you've got to put the needs of their interests ahead of your own. If you do that, not only will you be king, but you will be king of a united nation. That's good advice. But if you know the story, you know that's not what happens. Instead, verse 8 says, Rehoboam rejected the advice that the elders gave him. Why? Man, I don't mean to pick on you, but don't we just struggle with this? It was what he needed to hear, but not what he wanted to do. And more so, we could even say it was where he wanted to be, but not how he wanted to get there. You want to be the king of a united kingdom? Yes. Here's what you got to do to get there. He says, well, that's not how I want to get there. And he tried to go his own way instead. And so Rehoboam rejected the advice that the elders gave him. Of course he did, because he wants to be king. And nobody tells the king what to do. The king tells other people what to do, and they do what he wants. And the problem that I hope you'll see, the story that we're trying to apply to our own lives today, we generally end up where we don't want to be when we do what we want to do. Isn't that the case? Maybe that's why you've got so much debt built up and you don't know how you're going to get out of it. You say, well, how did I get to this point? Well, probably because you didn't follow some of the financial advice that others gave to you. And you said, well, I don't want to do that. I'll do that later in life. Now I want to spend it and I want to get all this stuff for me. And now you've ended up at a destination. It's not where you wished you were. It's not where you wanted to be financially. It's because you did what you wanted instead of what was going to get you where you wanted to be. Maybe your marriage is falling apart right now, and it's because instead of following the advice of people who said, hey, you got to invest in your husband, you got to invest in your wife, love them unconditionally, serve them. Instead, you thought this whole thing was about you and your happiness, and now your marriage is falling apart. Maybe this is why your kids don't plan to come back home after they graduate, because instead of building a relationship with them, you focused on other things. Maybe this is why your health is so bad. You say, how have I gotten to this point? Well, it's really not that difficult. It's pretty simple. You ate what you wanted to eat when you wanted to eat it. And when you didn't feel like exercising, you didn't. And so we find ourselves at a destination we didn't want to be at because we did what we wanted to do. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that strange how that works? And sometimes you find that over and over and over again, if you make enough of these choices, it's what I want to do instead of what I could do to get to where I want to be. Enough of that, you get to a point where you feel helpless and trapped. Where do I even begin? Moving from where I am and getting back on track to where I always wished I was. And then even more importantly, where God wished I was. I'm so far off track from where God wishes I was. This is helpless. I can't get back. No, that's not true. I'm going to tell you how just in a minute. But it's so difficult sometimes how we find ourselves in a place we don't want to be, and we think it's so complicated. It could be simple. I know that I myself included, I have struggled with anxiety lately. Have you struggled with anxiety? I think many of us have. But I've felt compelled in my heart and my mind by God. I think the reason many of us struggle with anxiety maybe is pretty simple. Could it be that because you spend more time on Facebook than you do in God's Word? Maybe you've struggled with a lot of anger recently. Could it be because you're venting instead of listening and feeling the suffering of others and empathizing with them? I know a lot of people who felt fear at a huge level, myself included. It's been a scary time. Ups and downs, right? Could it be that the reason we're so afraid, or the reason you're so afraid, is because you've been worried about hypothetical things that don't exist instead of trusting in an unmovable, unshakable, sovereign God? And I also know people that would say, I just feel so lonely and isolated and disconnected right now. And I know that I've asked and advised many people, connect with our church. We'll help you find friendships, relationships, even now, over Zoom calls and different ways that we can stay connected, that will nourish your soul and build a community that will support you and speak into your life and help you. But you've decided not to take those next steps. I just want to encourage you today, don't stay where you are. Why? Why would you stay where you are and in a few years be cycling back and realizing I'm at the same place? I didn't get to where I wish I was relationally or spiritually in my relationship with God, or growing in friendships with others and deepening my roots. I'd say it's time to make a change. You can always connect with us. You know how you can connect with us? Simply text the word connect to 817-687-9760. I've already had somebody do that in our previous service today, and I think it's time maybe for you to do that today. And if you're new around here and you text connect to that number, I'm going to mail you a gift just as a way of saying thanks for being here with us today and joining with us, because we care about you. And we think it is awesome when somebody new that doesn't have a church family finds a church home and finds a family of people that want to encourage you and build you up. Get into a community group. Go to our Discover Compass class. There's all sorts of ways for you to get plugged in and to build an environment around you that's going to help you flourish and thrive spiritually and emotionally. But you got to reach out. Text connect to 817-687-9760. So, Rehoboam rejected the advice that the elders gave to him. And notice, at the end of that verse, it says that he instead consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. Rehoboam goes to the guys who have not arrived. They know nothing about ruling over a united kingdom. And he asks them, what is your advice? Verse 9, how should we answer these people who have said to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? He finds somebody who will tell him what he wants to hear. And of course they're going to tell him what he wants to hear, because they work for him. He pays their salary. He's in charge of promoting them. And not only that, but they want to rise to power just as Rehoboam is rising to power. These other guys that have grown up with him say, well, now's our opportunity to come into power too. Those other elders that advised the previous king for decades, we want to take their position. So yeah, boss, whatever you want, we've got your back. And you and I do this too, don't we? We find someone who will tell us what we want to hear. And when we hear what we want to hear, you'll do what you want to do, which will lead you where you don't want to be. Did you hear me? Let me say that again. When you hear what you want to hear, you'll do what you want to do, which will lead you to where you don't want to be. Why do we do this? I'm just going to speak from my own personal experience, and if you relate to this, you can throw it in the comments right now. Sometimes we do this because of ego or pride. Somebody tells us to do something. They tell us how to get from where I am to where I wish I was. And I just resist because I think I know better, or I feel like I should get all the credit for success, and then I end up failing because I try to do it all on my own. Maybe it's ignorance. You thought you knew better, but you really didn't. You really didn't know enough to make the wise decision. And then, of course, spiritual warfare in our lives. There are forces of darkness, Satan and demons, that want to lie to you and mislead you and make you feel like the broken way is the right way, the healthy way. And you have to go down that road a little bit before you realize, man, I was wrong. I should have listened. I should have followed their advice. Verse 10, the young men who had grown up with King Rehoboam replied, hey, these people said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, make our yoke lighter. But you tell them this, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. What he's saying there is, you thought my father was a heavyweight? My little finger is bigger than him. I am really going to put the pressure and the burden on you people. That's the imagery there. Verse 11, you tell them, my father laid a heavy yoke on you. I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. If you thought my dad was a heavyweight, you just wait. That's the advice they give to him. And I don't know if you're listening along very well, or if you're watching this story, if you just want to jump in your mind, imagining the scene, you're saying, Rehoboam, this is terrible advice. Don't do this, Rehoboam. And you just want to jump in and shake him and say, don't listen to that. That's bad advice. But sure enough, 3 days go by. As King Rehoboam asked, he asked the people to go away for 3 days, give him some time to get some advice. When they return, they're waiting for the king's answer. And verse 13 says, the king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given to him by the elders. And if you read the whole story, he goes into detail about how mean and oppressive and brutal he's going to be to these people. And I'm the king. You better not come back at me. Fall in line and stop complaining. It's like when your dad used to power up and say, I'm dad, you will listen to me because I'm in charge. You ever have dad, you were in the car and all the kids were just going crazy in the back and you just go, you ever have that smack happen because you were, stop kicking my seat. He would hit your leg. Oh, wow. And he'd be like, hey, don't make me come back there. And he makes mom grab the steering wheel and he unbuckles his in the minivan so he can walk back there. And it's like, oh man, I better chill out. Dad's mad now. That's what Rehoboam's doing. He's saying, I'm in charge, I'm important, I'm powerful. It reminds me of the Saturday Night Live skit, if you guys have seen it, where Will Ferrell is the dad at the dinner table. Have you seen this? It's a really awkward, tense dinner, and the family is very tense, and, well, how'd your day go? And then one thing annoys another one. They start to argue, and the argument builds and builds and builds until finally Will Ferrell's character as the dad asserts his authority. I'm dad, right? And he says, I drive a Dodge Stratus. As if to say, I'm really important. And it seems so silly on that skit and funny. And if you've seen it, I hope you think that's funny. But I also know that in my own life, there's been times where I've really tried to assert my power and my position, and I end up looking really silly, like Will Ferrell's character in that story. And I end up overextending my reach. Instead of humbling myself and listening to others, I try to display my dominance over others. That's what Rehoboam did. But it backfired on him because the people had not really decided that they would follow him as their king yet. And so verse 16 says, when all Israel saw that the king Rehoboam refused to listen to them, they answered the king. And the language they use here is very offensive. It's lost on us today. But I just need you to understand, thousands of years ago, in their culture and time and place, this was extremely offensive. They said to him, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? Remember, King David was Rehoboam's grandfather. King David's father was Jesse. So they're saying, what part do we have in you and your lineage as our king? And they say, we reject that. To your tents, Israel. They're hearkening back to the time before they ever had a king. Remember when God originally intended for them to be a nation of law and judges? They say, we don't need a king. We don't recognize your right to be our king. To your tents, O Israel, look after your own house, David. You know what they're saying to Rehoboam? You know what, Rehoboam? You want cut stone? You want palaces? Go build your own blankety-blank palaces. We don't recognize your right to rule us, Rehoboam. Go rule yourself. And I imagine the guy spits on the ground at his feet. Very offensive. And then they all go home. And Rehoboam is so mad and angry about this that he says, I'm going to force them into line. So he takes one of his guys, Adoniram, and they go up to force them back into labor. Say, you will fall in line. You will do this. Verse 18 tells us, King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of the forced labor. Remember, Rehoboam's dad had 150,000 forced laborers. He says, I'm going to get these guys back into line. We got to keep working. We got to keep going. But look what they did. All Israel stoned him to death. They say, Rehoboam, you want cut stone? We'll give you stone. And they take their cut stone and they kill his leader with it. Verse 19 says, so Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Why'd I tell you that long story? Because in that moment when Rehoboam was supposed to take over as king, from that moment forward, the kingdom divided. No longer a united kingdom from that point forward. Divided. 10 of the tribes are now called the northern kingdom, led by a guy named Jeroboam, no relation. And then a southern kingdom of only 2 tribes, led by Rehoboam. He really got the short end of the stick there. All because one guy wouldn't listen to some really good advice. And from that day forward, the kingdom was split. So interesting, because he was told exactly how to get from where he was to where he wanted to be, a united kingdom. But he wouldn't do it. So here's the point of our story today, and the application for you and for me. Somebody knows what you need to do to get to where you want to be. It's not where you don't want to be, it's where you want to be. If you were to write down goals, where I'd like to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, it's what you would say you wanted to be at. It's where you want it to be. It's your wish, it's your desire. And somebody knows what you need to do to get to where you want to be. And they can see objective things that you can't see because they're objective, they're removed, and you're so emotionally involved in work or life or your marriage or whatever it is. But they can look in and see and help you in your parenting or the way you treat your wife or the way you work. They can give you insights that maybe you can't see. But you won't get there unless you listen. And so you got to pre-decide before you ever go into those conversations. You know what? I'm not going to resist. I'm not going to push back. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to receive this. So here's what I want you to do. And I've been praying that God would use that story we just told to soften your resistance to doing this. I want you to find somebody who has been through what you're going through and has been where you are and knows how to get to where you wish you were. And I want you to ask them, hey, knowing what you know, what would you do if you were in my shoes? In my parenting. Maybe it's somebody who's parented successfully, their kids are grown and they're good citizens and they've got great relationships with their kids, and you've got little kids and you're thinking, man, I hope I have a relationship with my kids like that. Go to them and ask them, hey, knowing what you know, you've been in my shoes and you're where I wish I was. What would you do if you were in my shoes right now? What could I do now in order to get to there? Maybe it's somebody who's been married over 50 years and you say, wow, that's incredible. I would love to have a long, happy marriage like that. Over 50 years. You go to them and say, hey, knowing what you know, what would you do now if you were in my shoes? Maybe you're newlywed and things have been difficult. It almost always is. You got to work through some things and get some wisdom and follow through. Don't make your marriage about you. Make it about the other person. Or maybe you know somebody who's gone through an incredibly difficult time. They survived a horrible divorce or a job loss, and you can go to them and say, hey, I am going through a terrible divorce or a job loss or some disaster, and they've been through it, and you say, hey, you've been through it. Knowing what you know, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Listen to them, and then do it. Find somebody who's where you wish you were and can tell you how to get there. Ask them, hey, how have you dealt with depression and anxiety? And listen to them. Ask them, how have you led a business through crisis? Because right now you're trying to lead your business and your work, your employees through this crisis. You say, man, I'm about to fall apart. How did you get through it? How did you do it? All sorts of things you can ask. Ask them how to save for the future. Ask them, how do I work from home with a toddler? Can I get an amen from any young families out there? My kids interrupt my Zoom calls about 17 times a day. But on a more serious note, maybe you ask somebody, hey, how do I love a family member or a friend who's struggling through addiction? How do I help them instead of enabling them and being ripped apart right now? How do I get through a tough job loss? Maybe a really important one that you need to ask somebody is this: how do I have difficult conversations with people who think differently than me? All sorts of great insights that you could receive and listen to from other people. Because listen, there's somebody in our world, and perhaps in your world, you might even know this person, who knows how to get from where you are to where you wish you were, where you want to be. The question is, will you listen? Will you do it? And it might take more than once. It was multiple times that led you to where you don't want to be, and it might take multiple times to get you to where you wish you were, but you will listen again and again and do again and again and ask for good advice and humble yourself. And instead of just doing what you want to do what you need to do in order to get to where you want to be anyways. If you do that, you win. And everybody underneath of you, everybody who loves you, they win too. But if you don't, you might find yourself in 5 years right here in the same place, wondering why you haven't gotten to where you wish you were. Don't just keep cycling. It's time to listen and do things differently. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the example of the stories that we can read in the Bible that give us insight into what's happened in the past, people who've been where we are and had to make important decisions. Honestly, Lord, decisions that were a bigger impact than decisions I have to make. And yet I can learn from their example and their stubbornness and say, well, maybe I need to humble myself. And Lord, I think this is a lot easier to talk about than to do. I know that from my own personal experience. And I'm just praying that you might soften our resistance today and that we might humble ourselves under your word and under the advice that others give to us in such a way as to move from where we are to where not only we wish we were, but where you wish we were. You see great potential for us, Lord. So I pray that you would do an incredible thing and change our hearts and our minds, humble us so that we might listen to others and change some of the things that we do so we don't keep in the same cycles. But we can get out of the rut, get unstuck, and move to where we wish we were. It's in the name of Jesus that I pray. Amen.